Alright, hello everyone and welcome back to Kottabos Space Program, where today we are having a look at the Procedural Pods Mod, which is being made by forum user Mr. Rome. Or perhaps it's Mr. Rome with how he has things capitalized, I don't know. But either way, what this glorious little piece of work looks to add into the game is a procedural method for creating your own custom command pods. And that actually is pretty cool. Now, the mod is very new. As of the time of recording this, it just released less than a day ago, and I gotta admit, I'm a little bit surprised I'm looking at it, as personally, I'm not typically a fan of procedural parts for the basic reason that I just prefer handcrafted parts over procedural ones. But the idea of a procedural command pod actually does intrigue me, and I can see a lot of really fun potential uses for it. So let's jump right on into the vehicle assembly building and take a look at what this mod does have to offer us. Now let's grab a Mark 1-2 command pod for size comparison, though I actually don't know how useful that's going to be today, considering a procedural part can be, well, any size. But oh well, let us grab our procedural command pod. Now, in its most basic form, it is actually quite small, fitting by default to the 1.25 size variety, and is basically just a tiny little tin can. But that tiny little tin can actually holds a fair few Kerbals, as in this form and any form, so no matter how large or small you make this thing, it will always be able to hold 3 Kerbals, requiring at least, of course, 1 to control it. Now, it does also, no matter what, have a built-in data transmitter, lifting surface, reaction wheel, and can do a crew report. Other than that, though, everything else is procedurally generated. So if we do right-click on the procedural command pod, we can change everything from the texture, the shape, the various dimensions of said shape, and then even the type of tanks for storage inside the command pod. So by default, it is mixed with electric charge, liquid fuel, and oxidizer, but you can also change it to an RCS mode where it is just electric charge and monopropellant. And of course, the amount of what is in these tanks, no matter which setup you go with, will be dependent on the size of this thing. The bigger it gets, the more it will be able to hold, which is, you know, always a good thing. As you can see now, it's holding up to 2,000, where if we go back down to its original size, you do tend to have to reset it there, it only held a 58 electric charge. So there we go, a lovely little piece, but that has a lot of power. For instance, if we do just zoom in to take a look at the various shapes, now it's pretty on par with more or less any other procedural part. So in the shape category, you are going to have the standard cylinder, a cone, a fillet cylinder, a smooth cone, and back to the cylinder. And as you can see, some of the dimension bits did change down here. So for instance, with a cylinder, you only have the option of the diameter and the length of the cylinder. But if you go to a cone, you have the ability to actually change the dimension of the top of the cone from, you know, any different standard measurement to anything in between. So yeah, sure, you could go with 1.25, or for some reason you can make it 1.375. Or 1.5, just anywhere you want it to go on the top there. Now you can also adjust the bottom and flare that out as well, or bring it in. And of course, just like with the cylinder, you have the ability to change the length. Now on the next one with the fillet cylinder, you have the same diameter and length, but you also have the fillet part here, the rounded bit, so you can change that to make it pretty much almost a full circle, which is kind of interesting. I don't know, I like the idea of a circular command pod plummeting down to a planet. It kind of intrigues me. And in this size, again, remember, it holds 3 Kerbals. Which is part of the reason I actually have a lot of ideas for using this, Just make a lot of these little tiny command pods and you suddenly can hold thousands of Kerbals on a normal size ship. It'd be wonderful. Now, of course, the next shape here is the smooth cone, and we have a few more options with this one over the previous ones, as we don't just have length, width, etc. Well, we still do have, of course, the top adjustment there, the bottom adjustment, and the length, but we also have the type of rounded curve to it. So we can either go with the standard curve, a curve round 2, round 3, round 1, or peaked 1 rather, peaked 2, sharp 1, sharp 2, and wasted. Yes, it actually is called that. Wonderful. And so we have a variety of different shapes that we can actually adjust here, and really you can pretty much make nearly any shape you can imagine, giving these different varieties of different shapes, curves, and different measurements. And overall, it's pretty cool. You can make some fun things with this, either trying to replicate an existing command pod in the world, or of course creating an all-new crazy wacky one. For instance, you could make anything from this kind of wine bottle top looking thing, to our weird cylinder that we made earlier, to just really all sorts of fun and wacky adjustments, and I do actually quite like that. Now, like I said, I normally don't care for that with other procedural parts, but for a command pod, I don't know, it does kind of amuse me. And of course, besides these shapes and measurements, we do have textures, which you can adjust here. The original texture there, to a plain white, a redstone stripes, a Saturn, a segmented SRB, Soyuz green, stock alike, the tiles, Titan stripes, white side, ablative, Atlas, blue side, Copernicus, there we go, I can read, cryogenic orange, German, gold foil, gray side, Moo, apparently? Interesting. And then we're back to the original. And so yeah, you can make just all sorts of crazy things, and I am perfectly okay with that. Now, there are some interesting limitations to this. For instance, the internal view is always and forever going to be the same as the Mark 1-2. Remember, it does hold 3 Kerbals on the interior, so the interior is based off the Mark 1-2. Now, also, as you can see, there's no hatches in this thing. No matter what shape you create, there is no hatch on any of these procedural command pods, so you're kind of stuck with your Kerbals inside unless you download another mod, which is Tiktaalik Airlock Collection, which then will allow you to have a part like this where you can shove on there and have an airlock for your Kerbals. But yeah, that is something you might have to do. Otherwise, you're going to have to move your Kerbals from your weird spherical command pod to wherever else in the ship potentially has a hatch for them to leave from. Now, other limitations, of course, you do, well, I don't know if it's a limitation, but you are, of course, stuck with the standard different textures here with procedural parts, which, I probably should mention, though you probably already guessed, you do require the original procedural parts mod as a dependency for procedural pods. And with that, you have just sort of the standard selection of textures here, but there is the mod freedom textures, which gives you more things to actually play with, so you'll have more textures there. It is also compatible, though, with real fuels and tweak scale, which I don't really see why on that one, considering we can already change it to whatever in the world we want. Look at that strange thing we just created, and that is a viable command pod. Heck, we can bring that tip all the way to a point, so we just have this weird, I don't know, dollop of icing looking command pod thing, and I am perfectly okay with that. And yeah, it's just a fun little tool. So let's actually go and see it working out in the world with a little craft that I made earlier. Ooh, actually, did I leave it on the launch pad already. Nope, my Kerbals are still in here. All right, so let us load up a strange little wine to spaceship that I made earlier, just using, you know, a simple little procedural command pod here with the moo texture and the smooth cone with the, you know, nice curve here. It's basically a little wine bottle shaped ship, and that amuses me. And if we actually go to launch, I'll show you, of course, the internal view, which I accidentally hit not launch, but exit. Okay, well, we'll just grab it from here. Of course, something always has to go wrong whenever I'm doing my things. There we go, wine to space. Okay, and there we are, our lovely functioning command pod with an internal view of the Mark 1-2. And yeah, of course, this one with just electric charge and monopropellant, and it is perfectly safe to fly and do whatever we so desire in the world. So yeah, that's really all there is to this mod, and it's a fun one, and again, one that I really didn't expect I would care for with my general just mehness towards procedural parts, but it is still quite cool and very, very useful. And if you would like to take a look at it for yourself and not do what I just did with poorly staging things before launch, then you can take a look at the link in the description as per usual to actually go and download this mod for yourself. But that is going to be it for this episode, my friends. I hope you all have enjoyed, and of course that you do come back for the next. Until that time, thank you for watching, and as always, have a good one. Now we go take my wine bottle into space and celebrate. Later, folks!